Hello and welcome to the Daily Atheist Morning Show. It is Tuesday, March 24th, 2020. Yes, I got that right this time. How are you guys doing? I hope you guys are having a good week so far. Haven't gotten the cooties. Nobody's gotten the cooties. I do not have the cooties. But I'm worried about getting the cooties. Not yet, yes. I've got guest host Andy Hall with me today. He is from Patheos, a humor blogger and a writer for Patheos. And also today we have got the amazing Dr. David Kyle Johnson, philosopher from King's College and well, you know what, Dr. Kyle, I'll let you introduce yourself. He's having some video problems, but we can hear him. Good morning, Kyle.
Okay, good. I'm sorry for popping in and out. So I'm David Kyle Johnson. I'm a professor of philosophy at King's College in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and I specialize in logic and metaphysics, and I do things for the great courses like sci-fi, science fiction as philosophy, that kind of stuff. There you go.
Yeah, well, oftentimes whenever you come on the show in the past, when you've been on the show, it's been about sci-fi. Today, we're going to talk a little politics. I figure you're ready for that.
Yes, we are.
So and it's important to note. It's important to note. Sci-fi is psi, and phi is phi, as I understand it.
Huh?
That's correct, because it is science fiction as philosophy, and so it's a very clever little pun that we did with psi and phi, and
I like it. I like it a lot.
With whenever he's been on before, we always get him to talk about his Star Trek collection and this guy's got some amazing stuff. Andy, I don't know if you've gone back and seen any of the shows, but if you're into Sci-Fi Saturdays, you ought to check out this guy's stuff. He's amazing.
I have read a few of his articles from Plato on Pop and Psychology Today, and I have enjoyed them greatly.
Yes.
Cool.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
Sure.
So what you're looking at behind me is my home collection. Whenever we've done this before, I've been in my office at work, and I have a different collection of stuff there. So this is like, I don't know if you call it the secondary collection of my stuff at home sitting behind me. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Yeah, so now you're at home because of the, problems now, huh? Yeah. Is it the virus keeping you out of your workplace?
Shut down campus, canceled classes, and I could still get into my office for about a week and a half, and then they kicked us completely off campus now. So I'm actually on my work computer. I take it home with me, yeah.
Gotcha. Well, I noticed your post about Trump and all the things going on with that. I mean, I'm sure you are clearly passionate about those things, and it was wonderful that you were willing to come on. Normally, I don't do a full actually all politic kind of show, but here we are today, this morning. Couldn't avoid it,
Yeah, so it turns out that I'm teaching this semester for the first time. I'm teaching this science, pseudoscience, and medical reasoning course, which obviously dovetails with this directly, right? And I've been using it. We're teaching online now, of course, and so I've been using it as motivation for my students. Essentially, like this stuff that we're learning is really important, because obviously it's like, basically I've squelched any kind of when are we going to use this in the real world kind of questions, right? That came at the beginning of the semester, right, when we're literally learning about science, pseudoscience, and medical reasoning, because that's all that anyone's ever talking about now because of the coronavirus. And so I've kind of used it to try to motivate them in a certain kind of way, right? But because the reason I'm teaching the class is because I'm passionate about it. Philosophy of science is kind of one of my go-tos, as it were, one of my specializations. I teach a lot of classes around pseudoscience and critical thinking and that kind of stuff. And so it's just infuriating, right? To hear things like the President of the United States saying, yeah, so there was this one guy who took this one thing and then he got better, so probably works, right? Like my freshman critical thinking students know that one trial like that does not establish the effectiveness of treatment, and this idiot is telling the entire nation, like, yeah, it's perfectly fine, right?
But that's just
one guy took it and he got better, so it must work.
Right, that's just one of the more recent issues. I mean, he's stumbled at every turn here, hasn't he? I mean, he fired the people responsible for...
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking about like what happened last night, right? Like I was watching the address last night, and he just literally was just like, yeah, there's this guy, and he took it, and he was on death's door, and then he took it, and he got better. So, right, and it's not like they shouldn't do clinical trials on it, which apparently that's what they're doing now. Although that's of course according to Trump, who knows what's actually happening because he's lied at every turn on this. So it's impossible to know whether there's actually any clinical trials that are going on. Like he said that GM and Ford are building respirators, and they're not.
Oh, really?
Right? Like they specifically said, like, yes, we'd like to try, but they're really complicated pieces of machinery, and we're not sure we can pull that off, right? And he's just telling everybody, oh yeah, making them, right? Like, it's infuriating on so many different levels, because like logical fallacies is one of my things, right? And he's just willy-nilly doing bullshit logical fallacies all over the place. He's peddling in scientific misinformation. And then of course the subject of the article, which we were, that I gave you, which as far as I know, I should check my email and see if Psychology Today has posted it yet. I don't see it yet. So, but he's basically he is thinking that the cure is worse than the problem, which means that the economic downturn will result from social isolation or social distancing is worse than the problem being the deaths that will result from COVID.
Right.
And that is manifest. Can you guys still hear me?
Hey, Kyle, it's getting kind of rough. Would it be possible for you to switch over to your phone? See if that'll work.
Yep, I can.
Okay. He's going to switch over to his phone, folks, and tap back in. And me and Andy and I will sit here and laugh at him.
We will do meaningless patter, which I'm very good at.
Yeah, well, we can do that. Well, I was going to pick on him for his internet because that's the kind of gal I am. But actually, he's been working on it. So, yeah.
Oh, right.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the internet gods, they give.
I know.
And they take away.
That's what they do. And they pick on us. Only because we're short, though. But, as a sci-fi nerd, or I'm a sci-fi nerd, I love his sci-fi nerding. I think we really need to get this situation fixed because we still have to talk about the Orville. I finished watching the Orville, and he has promised me another Saturday. Let's see if we can hear him or see him on this one here.
We back?
We're back. So if you
can you hear me? Is it better?
We can hear you. If you have a hard time, if you can on your phone, just turn off the camera part of the stream yards. I don't know if you can do that on the thing, but and that might give us just some audio. There you go. Hey, looky there. Are you still there? Okay. Let me do this. Can you hear me, Doc?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah. That got worse. It made it worse, brother. I'm sorry. We can't hear you at all now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna. But we can see.
Is that better at all? Is that better at all?
That's a little bit. Well, I heard that.
I did hear that. Yes.
Okay.
There we go.
I think we're. Sorry.
You're right, Link Thomas. It is the demons in the system.
Yes, it
I'll
is.
just interact with people on the chat.
Yeah.
Best name ever's there. Amiga Nuts. Amiga Nuts?
Amiga Nuts. Amiga
Nuts.
Yeah.
So what is an Amiga Nut? Should I know that?
That's a friendly nut.
Oh.
So Kyle, can we hear you now? Let's see if you're there, bro.
Yeah. So can you hear me now? I can hear you good now. I'm
okay.
On my cell phone. When I switched over to my phone, I forgot to turn off the Wi-Fi, so I was on the same connection.
Oh.
I turned it off, and now we're good.
More gooder, most goodest actually. All right, sounds great. So we were talking about Trump and his failure, and actually you were. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what happened with Psychology Today was I had written this. So I have this term paper coming up for my SPMR class. I don't have one. I have to grade it. But my science, pseudoscience, and medical reasoning class is writing a term paper on medical pseudoscience. They each have a different medical pseudoscience they're writing on. And I decided to write a sample paper
on social distancing for them. I thought it would be apropos, be a good learning experience for them and for me, give them a sample paper for what to write about. And so I decided to write this paper about like why social distancing is necessary in order to A, help prevent the spread of coronavirus, and B, save lives, right? Because there's some bullshit that's going around that suggests otherwise, right? And so I wrote this sample paper, and I was just going to post it as a Psychology Today post for my logical take blog. And I was just going to say, hey, here's a sample for the paper, for my course. We're working on these kind of things. It's kind of interesting, so here you go. And then at midnight, not last night, but the night before, Trump did this all caps tweet where he's basically talking about we can't let the cure be worse than the problem. After the 15 days, we'll reevaluate, which clearly indicates that he's wanting to just open everything back up. Just no more social distancing. Just open up all the businesses and everybody roam around freely. Who cares? We can't, right? And this idea that the cure is worse than the problem, what he seemed to be suggesting was that the effects of the economic downturn would be worse than the COVID virus, right? Mm-hmm. And then it turns out yesterday in a press brief. So what I did was I kind of rewrote the sample paper in a way that was specifically kind of addressing that tweet and that claim, and added a little bit more about like, how do we really know how many lives an economic downturn would cost? And can we compare that to what the coronavirus would do, et cetera, et cetera. Like after I finished it, it turned out to be like 2,000 words. And so Psychology Today usually likes 1,000 words. And so they were on it pretty quick. They came back and said, it's good. It's a little bit long. Cut it back by 400 and we'll be good to go. So I did that. I cut it by 400 really quickly. And now I haven't heard back from them. They haven't published it out. So I put it on my personal blog, and that's the one that I sent you. I'm hoping that I will hear from the editors today that they will post it and publish it today, because it's very apropos. Because after I wrote it and after I cut my 400 words from it and I resubmitted it, the president got on national television last night in prime time and said the same. We can't let the cure be worse than the problem BS. And then in the Q&A period, I believe is when he said that basically, like, we're going to see more deaths from the economic downturn than we would from COVID. Like, he's literally like, we can do two things here. We can wreck the economy, or we can stay inside, right? We can do social distancing, and wrecking the economy will cost more lives, is what he's saying, which is, I think, demonstrably false by orders of magnitude.
Now, I know you can't read minds, Dr. Johnson, but if you were going to take an educated guess, do you think he's just concerned about getting reelected?
Oh, of course he is, right? Like, he knows that a bad economy, like that's all he's run on is the economy. And that's what everyone in the Trump cult who gets pressed on any other issue, right? Because they can't win on any other issue. You keep pressing them on whatever. They lose, their go-to is, well, check your 401k. The economy's strong, so I don't care about the racism, the misogyny, the whatever, like anything else. They don't care about any of that he's incoherent, that he seems to be mentally ill. Like, they don't care about any of that. The economy. That's their fallback, the economy. Right. And the numbers are there, right? Or they were, right? But now that it's tanked, there's nothing left in their tank. Like, there's nothing else to say. Right, that is his fallback. That's what will get him reelected, is the economy. If the economy's in the tank, he knows he won't get reelected, and so he's got to do this to get reelected. And I think that's exactly what's on his mind. Is that he realizes that the economy in free fall will mean he's not reelected, and so he's going to ignore medical professionals who say that even with moderate measures, we're going to see 2 million dead, and if it's just life is normal, which it seems that he wants, we'll see 4 million dead.
What's really interesting is that this is his strategy, at least in my humble opinion, is that let's say everything opens up when he says it should open up, and then we have scores of more people dead. He'll just make up another lie.
Oh yeah, no, that is what is astounding, is that he will not only will he make up another lie, but the cult will believe it. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, in this, I mean, he could do, I mean, they're already like, he is to blame for it being this bad because A, he defunded the pandemic response teams in 2018, mm-hmm. right? and B, he completely dropped the ball in getting tests out. Like, we didn't really have to do social distancing. This is something I point out in the article, right? South Korea dealt with this and flattened the curve without such extreme social distancing by just doing testing everywhere. They were testing 10,000 people a day. And if people know they're negative, know that they don't have it, and then they can go about their lives, and then people who do have it, they isolate, right? Like, that's an easy solution that doesn't shut down the economy at all. We could have done that. We did not, because while we should have been producing tests, Trump was calling it a hoax and saying that it didn't really exist, that it wasn't a problem, that it was just another made-up problem, like the impeachment or like, you know, the Mayan calendar or whatever, right? Like he was calling it a hoax in that way, right? So he completely dropped the ball on this, and his supporters are already saying, like, oh no, he didn't defund the pandemic response team. He reorganized it to make it more efficient, which is a complete and utter fucking lie. I hope I can swear on here. Can I swear on here, Chris?
Yeah.
All right. Which is a complete and utter fucking lie, but they believe it, and they're going to and it will not. This is how ridiculous it is. In the same way that they believe, without any evidence at all, that there were millions of illegal votes in California, and that's why he lost the national election. They won't believe that millions of people are dying. There could be 4 million people dead in this country, and Trump will say, that's fake news. And they will fucking believe it, because that is how deep into the Kool-Aid they are.
Well, you know, I hate to sound like some kind of conspiracy nutter, you know, but I mean, at some point it seems intentional. I mean, his incompetence step by step by step, at every turn he's done exactly the wrong thing in this thing. It almost seems intentional. I would guess it was intent. I mean, that's the conspiracy nutter in me. You guys get back to talking about real.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can understand that reaction. We actually just covered conspiracy theories in this class I'm talking about.
Yeah.
We covered conspiracy theories just yesterday. And I essentially would suggest that that conspiracy theory gives him too much credit.
Yeah, well, no, not as a puppet, though. If he's just a puppet for Russia, which has been an ongoing theme from the very beginning. And, you know, now we're weak, we're broken, we're ready to be conquered.
Right. For him to be able to implement orders in that kind of way, I think gives him too much credit.
Yeah,
I think
he's pretty...
the better explanation that he is just incompetent. And I mean, this is what happens he just denies science, right? Like last night when he was pronouncing things about the effectiveness of drugs, right? There was no medical professionals on the stage, right? What's the guy's name? Farsi, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, like Farsi wasn't there, and because he's grown tired of Farsi contradicting him.
Yeah,
right. Like he said that this thing works, and then Farsi will come up and say, "Yeah, we don't actually have evidence that works at all." Right? Like he's tired of medical science checking him and pronouncing when he's lying about things, and so he just takes him off the stage like he does everybody else. If you don't just tote the Trump line, you're off, regardless of whether people's lives are at stake or not.
So, Dr. Johnson, I was wondering if you could, for like maybe a minute or two, talk about the difference between because would you say there have been real conspiracies that have occurred in the world?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so can you give the audience maybe a nutshell of how can you tell a real conspiracy against a fake conspiracy?
Yeah. So if you really want to dive into this, and then I'll do a little version of it or whatever. If you really want to dive into this, I actually have the book right here because we were talking about it in class yesterday. Check out Brian Dunning's book, Conspiracies Declassified. He's got a podcast called Skeptoid. In this book, he talks about a lot of debunked conspiracies, but he actually has a little section on conspiracies that turned out to be true. And I'll see if I can bring up the Gulf Tonkin is a good example. But these are some of the conspiracies that actually turned out to be true, right? So if you want more on those, you can check out his book or whatever.
Gotcha.
So I'll just say a little bit about what makes conspiracies generally irrational, and then what's different about the ones that turn out to be true. So the reason that conspiracies generally are irrational is because they don't meet what Ted Schick in his book, How to Think About Weird Things, which I've also got right here, calls the criteria of adequacy. And this is what we use in scientific reasoning. It's what we use in critical thinking. Hypotheses usually need to be testable. They need to make novel predictions, get those predictions right. They need to have explanatory power, not make unnecessary assumptions, and cohere with what we have good reason to believe. And conspiracy theories tend to fail to do all 5 of those things. They're generally not testable because they have ad hoc excuses built into them. Any evidence against a conspiracy theory can just be dismissed as, yeah, that's what they want you to believe. Right? So I can give you all the evidence in the world that Oswald was the lone shooter for the Kennedy assassination, and the conspiracy theorists will say, yeah, that's what the conspirators want you, like they put him there and they put that evidence there, et cetera, to make you believe that he was the lone shooter to throw you off track, right? And so any evidence can be dismissed because the ad hoc excuse is built into the theory. So it's untestable, and that makes it unfruitful. It is not simple because, and by simple, I mean parsimonious. I don't mean easy to understand. Scientific simplicity or parsimony is the fewest assumptions that you have to make. Homeopathy is not simple because you have to assume that substances have essences and that water has memory that can remember the essences of substance. Those are 2 giant assumptions you have to make homeopathy work.
Yeah. You're talking some Occam's razor shit there.
Yes, it's Occam's razor. That's exactly what it is. It's just another word for Occam's razor. And conspiracy theories are not simple or parsimonious in that way because they make grandiose assumptions about giant secretive organizations all keeping a perfect secret with powers and nefarious means that you can't comprehend. And those are giant assumptions that you have to make to make the theory work. And so they're not parsimonious in that way. They are not wide scoping because that means that they don't have explanatory power, which this can be, like, you might think that they have really wide explanatory power because they can explain everything, right? Like if you're an Illuminati conspiracy theorist, you can just use the Illuminati to explain everything. They're responsible for Kennedy and the moon landings and Corona and 9/11 and blah, blah, blah. And they just explain everything so you think it has wide scope. But it doesn't, because scope is about not providing an explanation, about explanatory power. And something doesn't have explanatory power if it raises more questions than it answers, right? Really good example of this is, well, okay, so let me give a kind of a silly example. It's an example I use in class. If I just say, if my conspiracy theory is the Bebos did it, and so whatever you're trying to explain, I say, oh, yes, the Bebos did it. 9/11 Bebos, coronavirus Bebos, moon landing Bebos, Kennedy Bebos, everything was the Bebos did it. And then you ask me, well, what are the Bebos and where do they come from and how do they do it? And I don't know.
They're just this powerful group that has those Bebos for a while now.
But if you just say, like, I don't, they're just giant group that has nefarious means and big powers or whatever, and why do they do it? I don't know. They just do, right? That's not an explanation. That's just like I put a name on it, right? But that's essentially equivalent to saying it's just magic, right? Using God as an explanation has this problem because if you just say God did it, well, where did God come from, and how did he do it? And by what powers did he do it? And what reasoning does he have behind it? Well, I don't know. He just does. That's not a good explanation. That's just a stand-in for not having an explanation. Right. And essentially, that's basically what conspiracy theories are doing, right? The Illuminati did it, right? Well, how they do it, why they do it, right? Like, it's just not a wide-scoping explanation. And then lastly, it's not conservative in that what conservative means in Schick's parlance is it doesn't cohere. To be non-conservative is to not cohere with what we have good reason to believe, right? Creationism isn't conservative because it conflicts with the fossil record, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Conspiracy theories are not conservative because they basically conflict with what we know about how people work. You get more than 3 or 4 people all trying to keep a secret, and the secret will get out. People are not that well organized. They're not able to keep that secret well enough, right? And so that's what makes conspiracy theories generally irrational. When did all that make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, for me, at least, yeah.
When conspiracy theories turn out to be true, it's because usually they're a lot smaller than like the grandiose Illuminati, right? Like it's a few people in the government or a government or something like that working in conjunction, et cetera, and it's a lot easier to kind of keep the secret. Secondly, what makes it different is that you have concrete evidence that the secret actually got out, right? So a really good example of a conspiracy theory that turned out to be true was that Russia hacked the 2016 election to help elect Trump, right? Like, and that wasn't that grandiose of a conspiracy theory. Right? That was just certain segments of the Russian government working, and they had certain people online, using bots and blah, 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 right? But that wasn't a grandiose giant conspiracy. The secret did get out, and we have tons of evidence for it. Like all our intelligence agency told us that that's exactly what they did. And we know that they've done it in other countries. So it's not like a crazy conspiracy theory to think that they did that to us, because they've done it to other people, and we know that they have, right?
So am I still a conspiracy nutter to suggest that Trump is intentionally playing down this coronavirus in order to damage the U.S. and make us as weak as possible for some kind of Russian overtake of some fashion because of Russian/Chinese? Oh, because of the connection. Now, does that not seem so crazy whenever we talk about the fact that there was a conspiracy indeed with Russia and Trump, and we know how that went?
Right. It's not as nutter as thinking that like the Illuminati are directing him or something like that, right? Because we at least have some evidence that, you know, Russia likes Trump being in charge. We know that they wanted him to be in charge to weaken us, et cetera, right? And we know that they, like, you know, the Mueller report made it clear that they were sharing polling data, right? The Trump campaign was sharing polling data with the Russians and specifically this campaign to hack the election and spread misinformation, right? So we know that there was that connection during the campaign, right? Mm-hmm. The idea, however, so there was like cooperation, maybe not coordination, but there was cooperation, right? To think that he's directly being directed and taking orders from like Putin or something like that, that's an extra assumption you're going to have to make that makes that a little less simple than just the idea that he's incompetent, right? So I think that he is incompetent is the simpler explanation. So that's the one I would prefer.
Why can't it be both, though? They're not mutually exclusive. He can be incompetent and working for Putin. How many times do you think Putin's gone, oh, man, I can't believe that fucking moron just said that?
You know what I think about? I think about how the Germans in World War I sent Lenin into Russia specifically to overthrow the Russian government and specifically to cause trouble in Russia. It was a real conspiracy. The German high command was giving money to the Bolsheviks, to the communists, you know, Lenin's group. And even though Lenin pretty much did what Lenin wanted to do, and at times it was congruent with what the Germans wanted to do, you know, but there was definitely points that their interests diverged. So there are moments that, let's say, Trump's goals and Putin's goals are running congruent with each other, but there are times that they probably, and that could just be, you know, just because that's what their interests are. That doesn't mean they're going to be having the same interests all the time.
But, you know, Trump has thumbed his nose at every world leader who's worked with us throughout the years, and every dictator he snuggles up with. I mean, I don't know what his problem. Well, I mean, I have ideas, but I mean, we have clear patterns here. I mean, it's all, I mean, so many things that have happened with him. Remember in the beginning, just the porn star thing. No, I did not have sex with her. No, I didn't pay her off. Wait a second. Yes, you did have sex with her. Yes, you did pay her off. Yes, it was through your lawyer. Now your lawyer's sitting in jail. Why are you still president? That alone. But then the corruption is so thick in Congress. Brother, you got some kind of clicking coming, Kyle?
Oh, it's me? Okay.
I don't know where it's coming from. I think it's Kyle.
I am not clicking. I can tell you
I'm
that.
not clicking.
I hear the clicking as well. Let me do a little adjustment here. I'm going to disappear for a second.
Okay.
Give me a minute. But keep talking.
I'll keep. Okay. So I mean, like, how did he manage to become president? You know, to begin with, it's just the corruption. There's something there again. I'm tying it back to Russia. Something happened in Russia. Hey, looky there. There's the guy.
I don't want to toot my own horn, and people who know me will say, "Oh no, Andy's going to say he predicted the 2016 election again," and I'm going to say that I predict. Yeah. See, okay, so we both did. You know, Trump got help. There's no doubt about it. But also, Trump is a good campaigner. He has good political instincts.
Oh yeah.
And he likes to maul people, and that's what Americans like to see.
Well,
they like to see.
He's catering to a specific group of people who fall for that crap. That's you know, is Trump a Christian? Is he an evangelical? No, but he sure knows how to. You're right. He's very skilled at tooting that horn that gets those people to do what he wants them to do, and they just flock to him. Like somebody mentioned, cult of personality over in the chat, and it's right. He's like the Pied Piper for morons.
He does a very good job in getting people in creating an emotional response, right?
Yeah.
So he creates this emotional response in people. And because we're irrational, because we have these bad brains, there is a certain segment of the population that won't remember why they get this emotional response for Trump, but when they see him, they will say, "Oh, I must like him because I feel this way." I know it sounds crazy. I believe it's called Schachter's two-tier theories of emotion, but Trump definitely knows how to create an emotional response, and people will respond to that and saying, "Oh, I must like him."
Yeah. Well, their ability to ignore the lies. I mean, he'll come out and he'll say, I mean, one thing and turn around and just say, I told those people to wear red hats. They need to wear red hats. And they're like, sir, why did you tell those people to wear red hats? And he's like, I didn't tell anybody to wear red hats. And they're like, you stupid people. He never told anybody to wear red hats. What kind of, and then, the news is like, damn, Democrats are having problems with red hats. I mean, they don't seem to care. We can't hear you, Kyle. I think you're there. Yeah, you're muted on our end. This is just one of those deals. It's gremlins.
Magic of the internet. It's magic, but not good magic.
Yeah, well, there you go.
More magic.
More magic.
Let's see if that would work.
There you go.
Hey, we got you.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
We might get the clicking again. I'm not sure.
Hey, well, we'll see. We'll plot on.
You know what? I think it's a conspiracy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
would say so too, but I'm leaning towards the fact that Trump would be too incompetent.
Well, Trump seems to be a short-term thinker. He's not really a grand strategist. He just knows, he has a very certain playbook, and it seems to be guided by shorts. He has long-term goals, of course, which is just more for Trump. But his strategy is just lie, and then lie, and double down and lie again.
Well, he couldn't do any of this without McConnell and those in the conservatives in the Senate and the Congress. He couldn't do it. I mean, but yet they bowed to him.
Yeah, that's where you left off whenever I logged off or whatever. When you were talking about the corruption of Congress, is that like the Senate is just toast to lie. I mean, the impeachment is the perfect example, right? There could not have been more obvious evidence that he was guilty of impeachable crimes. And they just flat out ignored it.
Yeah. They blocked every opportunity they could to get the evidence out there. Any evidence, they did everything, the opposite of everything they've done when trying to convict a Democrat.
Yep. Oh, yeah. I mean, imagine if Obama was in charge and he had botched things like Trump has botched things.
Oh, yeah.
Right? They'd be calling him to be hung in the public square.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
At this point, right? The hypocrisy is palpable.
All he had to do to get them to burn effigies of him was to win an election. Just imagine if he had stumbled the way Trump has stumbled. How many times has Obama been caught cheating on his wife?
Yeah.
Obviously not enough times.
Never. Yeah. And yet Trump is why did the Christian right not follow Obama based on his leadership as a family man, as a man of God, as a husband who's been with his wife and grown his family? I don't know, but they went right to Trump.
Well, I can tell you a little bit about that. So, and this relates to the Orville. All right. I'm writing a book. I'm editing a book on the Orville, and I'm writing a chapter for it on environmentalism, essentially, in global warming. In this particular episode, about where it's called "If the Stars Should Appear," or should the stars appear? No, if the stars should appear, where they find a bioship that's about to run into a star. It's clearly an analogy for what's going on with global warming. I wrote this chapter for the book, and in it, I did a little research and found this book called the Gospel of Climate Skepticism, Yeah, I think that's what it was, Gospel of Climate Skepticism. And in it, he argues that what's happened is that, so historically what happened was this. The right was, the left was concerned with the environment, the right was not. And around 2005, after Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth came out, there was actually an evangelical movement to do something about global warming. I forget, it's like EEC or something like that, the evangelist environmental concern or something like that. And there was this movement, and the leaders on the religious right realized that this environmentalist movement threatened their power within evangelicalism, right? And they thus launched a concerted effort to debunk essentially environmental concerns to keep the religious right on the political right. And they use right-wing media, they use the radio outlets, and everything that they could to basically promote arguments that were coming out of the Heartland Institute and that kind of stuff, which their motivation was libertarian. This is another part of the article that I talk about, that the seculars who are against it are against climate change and acknowledging climate change and that kind of stuff, because it essentially debunks the libertarian point of view, the idea that if you leave things alone, everything will work out, like the invisible hand kind of idea. If you leave things alone, everything will work out in the end, both with the economy and the environment and everything else. They were putting out those arguments. The religious right repeats those arguments ad infinitum on conservative airwaves and in conservative publications or whatever, to basically keep their followers on the political right. And what happened over time was that they ended up creating a culture in which even remotely being concerned about the environment was to be a leftist, to be like a communist, socialist, atheistic leftist. And so it became even socially dangerous to express concern about the environment. And so it creates this culture where any environmental concern is just completely dismissed, and it puts them completely in that camp, right? And something similar happens with abortion, right? And so it is because those are, to even be at all on the other side on the abortion issue is to be this leftist liberal commie, right? Mm-hmm. And so all Trump has to do is align with those ideologies, be anti-environmental, like be against climate change, say it's a hoax, right? Mm-hmm. Say that you're pro-life, and they are on your side automatically, and then you can do whatever the fuck you want, right? Because they are so ideologically driven to support those kinds of things, that they will make excuses for you no matter what you do.
And if you toss in any kind of discrimination or dislike for brown people, it just seals the deal.
Yeah, that's another big part of it. Absolutely. I shouldn't underestimate the amount that racism plays in it, right? But basically that's where he's got his bases covered, right? If you're any of those things, then we'll make excuses for you all day long, right? And this is why if Obama did what Trump had done, they would be calling for him to be hung in the public square.
Absolutely.
Because he's not these other things, right? Mm-hmm. He's not racist. He's not against, he's not a climate change denier. He's not pro-life, right? And so they're not willing to make excuses for him, right? And that's all it comes down to.
What Trump is doing is taking advantage of this weaponized tribalism that's been going on in the country.
Mm-hmm. Weaponized Christianity, I've heard that recently.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely there are definitely white atheists out there and white non-believers out there who are for Trump just because they see themselves as part of that tribe.
No, and so it's not just a religious tribe, right? There are those who are because they're racist, or if they're not racist, because they're against climate change, or because they're just straight up libertarian, right? Like they like the fact that he is completely made the government inept and incapable of accomplishing anything because they hate the government. Yeah. Right, and so they're perfectly fine with him dismantling it from the inside, right? And that's why they like him, right?
Kristen, our best name ever in the chat says, is it conspiracy theoretical of me to think Trump and other leaders, obviously, I guess, well, we'll just leave that, whoever, want the glaciers of the North Pole to melt so that they can create a shorter shipping lane and make money from that? Wouldn't surprise me. I'm sure there's more to it than that, but... if there were,
I would say that's just an added benefit. That's a perk
for them
to have the Northwest Passage. A legit Northwest Passage.
Yeah. For as long as
I would say it's an added benefit. Yeah, and there are definitely people who. I know that people will argue for that, right? That we don't care about climate change because it'll melt ice and make a shipping lane and whatever, we can make money. And there are definitely people who do that. I think one of the reasons that Putin is so opposed to climate change, or I should say that he thinks climate change is a hoax, is because Russia will see short-term benefit from it, because Russia will actually get warmer, their climate will change, and it will actually benefit in a number of ways in the short term, right?
Right.
And so he can be perfectly fine with denying climate change because he thinks that it will actually benefit him, right?
Right.
Anytime that someone says like, somebody does such and such because they'll make money from it, I wouldn't call that a conspiracy theory to any kind of grandiose degree.
Right.
It depends. I mean, there's situations where that is the case, right? I think that there's a lot of like, and not like, I'm for Medicare for all. I think we should have a nationalized health insurance program.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of conspiracies about big pharma and that kind of stuff that are actually conspiracy theories. Not that they're not to out make money, but they're not like, they're like aiming to make you sick or to keep you ill so that they can make money. I think that's going too far.
Right.
But
yeah. I agree, because there's an economic incentive to create a therapy that no one else has, and they will make bank on that.
Yeah.
Right. What about the things that are going on in Congress now and the Senate? The whole of it, obviously, but it's talking about McConnell has included a $500 billion corporate slush fund to help protect the rich. And that,
so that's apparently why the Democrats kiboshed the COVID response bill, was because it was basically a giant giveaway to a bunch of corporations, and it had no insurances for kind of working class people or the poor, right? It
seems at every turn the McConnell that whole clique is trying to do everything they can to bleed and kill off the poor people. It's just, is that not how it seems? The longer it goes, the more is that how it seems. Now we've got a literal plague going through, and what are they doing? They're fighting in Congress over trinkets while our people get infected and die.
Yeah, or getting more money to rich people, right? Like, notice that. So I think something similar might be going on here. One of the reasons that it's libertarian, generally think tanks, right? Small government conservative libertarian think tanks that are producing all of the misinformation and funding all the quote unquote scientific research on climate denial is because climate change directly contradicts the libertarian small government idea that if you just leave things alone and don't you don't do government interference and stuff, that everything will work out for the end. The invisible hand will make the market work out to everyone's good, not only financially but also for the economy. And I can show you quotes from. I've got an article on this where it talks about people like specifically making arguments, libertarian arguments, like, oh yeah, no, the right way to protect the government is less regulation. This will make people care more about their own property or whatever, and they'll take better care of it or whatever. Right. And the idea that the fact that climate change is real completely debunks that notion. And what we have to do to get out of climate change, individual actions won't do it. We have to have a massive government coordinated effort to deal with climate change, and that's their apocalypse. That is their nightmare. Government coordinated international government action and regulation to curb to do anything is their nightmare. And so of course they have to deny it, right? Mm-hmm. Notice that what we need to do to keep the economy from going into complete free fall during this isolation, quarantine, social distancing period, right? What we need to do is give money to the bottom, not the top. Right?
Yeah, it's
we
just
need
gonna get
to
worse.
Make sure that people have the money to pay their rents and pay the rent and buy food and shop and spur the economy that way, right? Notice that instead what they're wanting to do is give money to big giant corporations. If we do what the Democrats want, right, and give money to people on the bottom instead of at the top, and it works, and the economy stays alive, and it grows even more because people had this down-up stimulus instead of a top-down stimulus. Buddy, I'm on. My son's going to exercise for a minute. If we did that, it would completely prove that trickle-down economics is bullshit, which we already know that anyway. All the evidence points to that anyway, right?
Yeah,
but if we did this bottom-up stimulus and it worked, it would be a giant talking point for Democrats. Look, this is how you spur the economy. Right. You do not give you don't give tax cuts to the rich, hoping it will trickle down. Right. You give to the bottom, and it builds up.
But you know what their plan is to give all this money to the rich, and then they want to hash out a few checks to the poor, like $1,000 checks here and there to the poor, and the poor who they'll just buy it. It's like a big screen TV they're getting. And they'll be like, the president did this to help us out. Look what he did. He gave us all money. He tried. He stimulated the... But when you go look at what he's really trying to do, he's not. He's giving most of it to the rich, and only a certain people are getting the $1,000 per person or whatever. And then the lesser people are getting nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, because if as long as King's doesn't close down, right? Like, which that's a possibility at this point. Like, I'm afraid that, like, if the economy completely tanks, we won't have any incoming students in the fall, right? But as long as King stays around, I won't need that $1,000. I'll be okay, right? People way down need it. Like, I know people who need it just to make their rent, and that's what they'll use it on, is their rent or to buy food or whatever, because they're out of a job.
But then that'll be gone, and they won't have that. And the Democrats' package helps in so many different better ways than just giving people $1,000.
Yeah. And there's so much more that you need to do, right? You
Absolutely.
need to.
That's what I'm going.
It's perfectly fine to give businesses money so that they don't go under, right?
Yes.
That they can continue to pay their rent to stay where they're at or whatever. So when this is over, they can reopen. That's fine, right? But that has to come with caveats. Like, and by the way, you can't fire everyone in the meantime and then just use that money however you want, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to use this money to protect your workers and keep people their jobs and that kind of stuff. And that's not in the Republican plan. They just want to basically give businesses a whole bunch of money so they can do whatever they want, including buy back their own stocks and that kind of stuff at lower rates, and so they can make a bunch of money that way and inflate their values and that kind of stuff. And it's I mean, it's that, and that's why the Democrats rightly blocked it, was because it was a big giant giveaway to corporations that didn't help regular people.
True. Yeah. Well, it doesn't surprise me that it's like been their hallmark from the beginning. Again, it just seems like they're doing everything. It's one thing to ignore the poor. It's another thing to go out of your way to actively try to hurt them. And that's really, it seems like the right. And the sad thing is so many people on the right are the poor.
Yeah.
You know, I know people who are like, well, I still got my child discount thing in the tax, so Trump isn't all bad. Well, yeah, but you're ignoring all the really bad things he did, and you only got that child income tax credit because they couldn't take it away from you. But when they can, brother, they will.
I don't think it's a conspiracy, but I think that there is a strong incentive for Republicans to keep their people poor and for the evangelicals to keep their people poor, because as soon as they start doing well, they will stop being, well, Christian, right? Because there's a positive, I mean, there's a trend line that if the more safe you feel, the less religious you're going to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that means you're going to be going out of that tribe. So there's this perverse incentive for Republicans to keep a majority of their followers poor, sick, and stupid.
Yeah. And that's why they're opposed to education, right? Because for yourself, you can figure this stuff out for yourself, right?
They're opposed to public education, sir.
Yeah.
They want education.
Education, they want public funds for religious education, but not. Yeah, that's exactly right. And it is a misnomer to think that, like, the average, like, a lot of people thought that Trump got elected because of economic woes, and that what was going on was a lot of poor people were voting for Trump because they were feeling the pinch, and they were hurting from the economy, being bad or whatever, and they wanted Trump to turn it around or whatever, and the evidence just did not bear that out. Most people who voted for Trump, majority of his voters were completely well off. They were perfectly fine. They wanted the tax cut, or they were racist and wanted his racism, or they wanted his environmental denials, climate change denial, that kind of stuff, right? That said, however, and I know a few, right? There are a number of his, hardcore red hat wearing,
pineapple
fervent,
on pizza loving.
Yes, fervent, gun loving, supporters who are poor, right? Who are not wealthy at all. But like him for either for cultural reasons or because of the environmental stuff or because of the guns or because of the abortion or whatever, right? And they end up voting against their own interests, right? Because they're essentially getting screwed in Trump's economy, right?
Absolutely. But they're willing to get screwed to hurt other people, the people they want to hate. Sorry, jumped in there.
Well, they're voting on tribal identity. So for them, the most important factor in their life, the most important variable, at least in my opinion, is being part of the tribe.
Right.
And that's what they're voting for. And everything else is secondary. The most important thing for them is to feel this kind of participation in this group.
Right. I think that's exactly, and it's so much about group identity. And this is actually, so I assume that you guys are aware of something called the backfire effect.
Oh yeah. Would you like to explain that?
Yeah. So out of curiosity, can you guys see me move, or is my picture still?
You're fine. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right.
That's
You
the
guys
least
are
of our
still on my
problems.
end, but that's fine. So the backfire effect is some research came out, and I forget offhand. This is actually in the Orville article that I wrote, and I'll send it to you if you want me to send it to you, my draft. The backfire effect the backfire effect is essentially, if studies have been done to show that if you present counter evidence to someone about something that they believe, and so they believe X, and you present them evidence that not X, right? That they will not change their mind and think that they are wrong, but they will double down and believe even harder that X is true. That's essentially the backfire effect.
Yep.
Okay.
Since it was published, research has come out that some people couldn't replicate the results and that kind of stuff. And it looks like that what's going on is the backfire effect works, but only sometimes. And what it works with is things that are like beliefs that people hold that are central to their identity, to the way that they see themselves, right? So, for example, an anti-vaxxer, if the CDC says that to an anti-vaxxer that vaccines are safe and effective, and they present them with evidence to the that vaccines are safe and effective, the anti-vaxxer will completely ignore that and say that's all a big conspiracy, and I'm not going to vaccinate my kids anyway, blah, 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 even though that could result in their own child's death, right? Because they see themselves as an anti-vaxxer,
Yeah.
right? But if the CDC says, hey, there's E. coli on romaine lettuce, don't buy romaine lettuce, okay, no problem. I won't buy romaine lettuce. They have no problem accepting that from the same people, from the CDC, right, or the FDA, or whoever's giving it, right, whatever government organization is giving it. If it's about romaine lettuce, well, their identity is not tied up in romaine lettuce, and so they'll very willingly believe that it's got E. coli and not buy romaine lettuce until the FDA or the CDC says that it's safe, right? Because it's not wrapped up in identity. And so the backfire effect seems to be real, but it's only in effect when you're dealing with a belief that is central to the identity of the person that you're talking to. And so that's why any evidence that, suggests that, Trump is bad or whatever, that Trump's done something incompetent, that he's done an impeachable offense, that he's mishandling the pandemic or whatever, will be completely ignored by people who are in the cult,
Yes,
right? Because that's part of who they are. They are a Trumpster. They are a MAGA hat wearer. They are a member of the NRA, right? They are pro-life. They are Christian or whatever, and so they'll just deny it because it's part of their identity.
I have a question about the backfire effect. It seems to me, and tell me if I'm completely off base here, that if you are part of the same tribe, it's easier. Like, in other words, I'm a dopey white guy. I don't know if anyone's noticed this. I'm just a dopey middle-aged white guy with gray hair. But it's easier for me to talk with other dopey white guys who look like me about ideas that they may not agree with.
Mm-hmm.
Because visually, we appear to be in the same tribe.
But we're not in the same
Right.
tribe. Well, we are.
But in other words, is it easier for me to talk to a conservative person who looks like me and to instill or to create doubt in that group?
I see what you mean. As opposed to someone who doesn't look like me, if they present counter evidence,
Right.
Exactly.
I'm more likely to be skeptical and say, I'm not sure if that's really true or whatever. Right. Okay. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, and that might be part of it. I mean, I don't know if they took demographics into account when they did the original backfire study or not, right? That could definitely play a factor. But I like intuitively, that seems right to me, that people are more willing to be corrected by people that are in their tribe, and especially people that they know. So this is one of the things that, like, if you really want to change people's minds about something, about these kinds of things, right? So if it's about romaine lettuce or whatever, you can just present the evidence and you can probably change their mind pretty easily. But if it's about stuff that is near and dear to their heart, that's part of their identity, so it's religious beliefs or political beliefs or something like that, it's really hard. You have to do one of two things. You either have to do something like be a professor and have them in a class for an entire semester and slowly introduce them to one concept after another and get them to care about reason and evidence and teach them what good evidence is and what bad reasoning is, et cetera, and emulate it for them and talk about other topics where it's easy for them to change their beliefs, et cetera, and like over a long period of time where they think about it every day, and that then you can start getting to care about that kind of stuff and change their views about certain things. And I've actually, like, I do surveys. I've done in the past. I've done surveys in my class about what my students believe before and after they take my classes, and I definitely can see a result. Like they will change their beliefs about certain things, not everything, but about certain things.
Have you published that? Have you published those results?
No, I haven't. I've got it like in PowerPoints where because we go over the results at the end. About how they've changed their beliefs over time. I should say I see marked differences in all the beliefs that I mention. I just don't change everyone's minds.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
Like,
that's normal.
Like belief in ghosts in my students will go from like 80% to like 25% or something like that.
Nice.
But it won't go away completely. Where I can eliminate Bigfoot. I multiple times. Like I can get rid of Bigfoot and Loch Ness and usually 9/11 conspiracy theories. That kind of, like I can get rid of that stuff. Other things like ghosts and that kind of, it's a little bit harder, but those start a little bit higher.
Yeah.
So the other way to do it is maybe I should make a Psychology Today article where I talk about that, where I talk about the results of my classes and that kind of stuff. But anyway, the other way to do it is, and it's so much work, is to be their friend, right? Like you have to get to know them and empathize with them and take a kind of Socratic method and ask them questions and raise concerns, but raise it in a gentle way, and like essentially kind of keep asking questions until they finally come to the conclusion themselves. And it's like they think that them changing their mind is the result of conclusions that they've drawn and their reasoning and that kind of stuff, when really you're kind of guiding them along this process. But it's so difficult. I mean, it's just laborious. It takes hours and hours of time spanned over, months or years, where you get to know someone and befriend them and blah, 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 blah. And it's exhausting. I mean, it's so hard to do. But essentially what you're doing is you're ingratiating yourself to them. They're becoming familiar with you. And then they're doing essentially what you're talking about, Andy, right? Like, oh, you're like me. And now you're correcting me. And maybe I'm more open to being corrected to someone who's like me in that way.
I'm going to put on my Baptist minister hat for a second, coming from the Baptist fold. I've never been a minister, but I grew up Baptist. It's like if there was a great commission for people who look like me, and if you're like even close to people who look like you and who are Trump supporters or science deniers, it is so important to talk and to make relationships. And because if you can turn one, then they could turn another. There's this kind of cascade effect that is really possible. And if you're looking for a way in real time to change things, to change hearts and minds, that's the way. I mean, at least in my opinion, just go out there and talk to people who you look like that may not agree with you.
Yeah, no, and notice that's taking the same, like the evangelism approach is taking the same kind of approach, right? Like the idea is that it's not something, you don't convince someone to convert to Jesus in like a single sit down or something like that, right? You have to reach out to them and befriend them over time for a long period of time, and then eventually they come around, right? Like it's the same kind of deal, and it is it's exhausting, right?
It is, and it's not for everybody. There's a skill set involved too to it.
Nope. Yeah, that's why I do what I do, because I can't do that. I do what I do by, I teach, right?
Right.
And not all my classes are about that. Like in philosophy, I'm not about changing people's minds per se. I'm just about getting them to examine their own beliefs and that kind of stuff more critically. And but like when I'm teaching critical thinking, right? Like I want them to come to realize that conspiracy theories are bunk and ghosts don't exist and that kind of stuff, right? And that's where it takes it's a semester-long process of getting them to come to even value reasoning and evidence, right? Like they have to care about, they have to come to care about knowing the way the world is and come to realize the value of evidence and critical thinking and in drawing those kinds of conclusions, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So one other thing I wanted to talk about, which so going back, so I think this is a really important point to make. So going back to COVID and Trump's response to it, the central claim he's made is that he doesn't, the concern he's expressed is that he doesn't want the cure to be worse than the disease. He says the cure worse than the problem, right? And the idea is that he thinks that the economic effects, the effects of the economic downturn that will be a result of the quarantine will be worse than anything that COVID could bring, right? And all evidence points to that being demonstrably false, right? I mentioned before that the Imperial School at London, who does they're the number crunchers who do the models and predictive and that kind of stuff, right? Said that if we just continue on with life as normal here in America, we will see 4 million deaths.
Yeah.
Right. And that's more than Americans that died in the Civil War. I mean, and within a stretch of like 6 months, right? Not to mention, I mean, we'll have problems dealing with that many dead people all at once, like what to do with them, right? Like what to do with the bodies. If we do moderate mitigation, it'll be 2 million. Only major close downs and social distancing will keep it in the thousands where it's manageable, right? And the idea that a downturned economy could kill that many people is ludicrous, except for one possibility. So what I point out in the article is that, like, the only kind of economic downturn we have to compare this with would be the Great Depression, right? And we can ask ourselves, how many people did the Great Depression kill? And it looks like all evidence points to it really didn't kill anyone. There was no giant spike in mortality during the Great Depression. Yes, some stockbrokers jumped off building and committed suicide, right? But this was not numbers in the thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people, right? This would have been at most, I'd have to look up the number, but at most I would think it's like a few hundred people committed suicide because of the stock market crash in the Great Depression, right? There's this internet rumor that 7 million people starved to death during the Great Depression, but it turns out that just was Russian propaganda from long ago, like anti-capitalist Russian propaganda that was floating around. There is no evidence at all that 7 million people died of starvation.
Didn't Russia actually starve millions of their own people?
Yeah, no, and that's why they did that, right? Like they did, millions did starve in Russia, and so they were trying to say, well, capitalism is just as bad because look about how many people starved during the Great Depression. That was the propaganda to try to counter that argument, right? And again, it's just propaganda. There's no basis in reality for that idea. Mortality did not spike in America. There's no real evidence that happened. But here's the kicker. Trump could end up being a self-fulfilling prophet, because the reason that millions didn't starve to death during the Great Depression was because of FDR's New Deal. Yeah. Right? Giant, huge government programs to make sure that people had basic necessities and could live and had a place to live and had food and utilities and that kind of stuff to make sure that people didn't die. That's why we didn't have millions die during the Great Depression, was because of these giant socialist programs to keep people from dying, right? If we went on with the social isolation and had the economic downturn, but weren't willing to do something like FDR did, right? Then we could have millions die. If we don't get a stimulus package that actually feeds money and goods and services down to the poor, to all these people who are going to be unemployed because of this, right? We could have millions die as a result. Will it be more than 4 million? Will it be worse than COVID? I mean, basically, my answer to that is it will be if we let it be. It will be that bad only if we let it be that bad. Yeah. Right? And so the fact that millions will die if we don't do those social programs is not a reason to say, well, then let's just open up everything, right? So that the pandemic gets worse, because that's going to lead to 4 million deaths for another reason, right? The argument here is we need to remain socially isolated to keep the COVID deaths down. And then we need basically another New Deal, right? To make sure that people don't starve to death as a result.
Yeah.
That's the only way you're going to keep millions of Americans from dying in this situation.
Our food supply chain collapses, and things are going to get ugly.
Yeah, it'll get
Very fast.
really bad, really quick.
Yep. Well, guys, I've it's been the hour. I know you've got a son there, Kyle, just dying to exercise.
He already did it and left.
Oh, well, if you want to continue going on, you're welcome to continue talking about the things that we haven't gotten to yet. So I'll leave it up to you.
Because I've kind of said everything that's been on my mind. If you've got more questions, I'll be happy to take them. I do need to get to grading some, to not grading, but creating a video for doing some online class stuff here in a little bit. But
Gotcha.
I'm happy to answer some more questions if you've got any more questions.
Well, I did want to. All right, so we do right now have that thing going on in the Senate. Back to that. The House and the Senate trying to get money to the poor and all that. Now we find out that the conservatives are trying to give it all the way to the rich and not really helping the poor, and the Democrats are trying to. How is it that not everybody sees this?
Propaganda. I don't know. What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, propaganda. Propaganda is a great thing if you're doing the propaganding. Propaganding, is that a verb? I don't know. I'm going to make it a verb. If you're doing the propaganding, yeah, the Democrats are just not as good at it for a myriad of different reasons.
Yeah.
And the Republicans have weaponized tribalism to the extent that their propaganda is like they're mainlining, like the the GOPers out there. This propaganda, they are mainlining it all the time.
Yeah. Well, it sure seems like they're willing to.
Go ahead.
It seems like they're willing and happy to buy whatever they can, no matter the detriment. And we've watched this thing. We watched Trump say, "Oh, it's a hoax. It's not a problem. It's not that big of a problem. It's a little bit of a problem, you know." And now he refused to get tested. Now he did get tested, and he didn't. You know, I mean, and they're just leading by such a bad example. How CNN, MSNBC, all these people, all these news outlets are not propaganda necessarily for the Trump campaign. Fox is, yeah, no doubt. And there's a few, right-wing, Breitbart and whatnot, but nothing compared to MSNBC, ABC, CBS, all these.
But the thing is that, the rule and not the exception are that well-motivated, financed, small groups of people typically steer policy for the majority.
Back to corruption.
You know.
And one of the things is, MSNBC is a bit left biased, but not anything compared to how right biased Fox News is.
Right.
True.
Right. It is pales in comparison. And what's really sad is that, there's this constant cry that the quote unquote mainstream media has a liberal bias, right? And that's completely ridiculous because the most watched television news network is Fox.
Yeah.
That is actually the mainstream means the one that everyone's watched. Mainstream means the popular one. That's what mainstream means. Fox is the popular one. That is the one that most people watch. It is the most watched. You can find all the other news networks, and they don't match up to Fox's viewership, right? They are the mainstream. The mainstream media is completely right-wing and right-wing biased, right? Because that is what Fox News is. That's the mainstream media, right? But to them, the mainstream media is MSNBC and CNN and et cetera, right? But what's happened is that constant claim that the MSNBC and CNN, that the mainstream media is liberal biased, puts a pressure on them to give a sense of neutrality, to try to project themselves in a way that is neutral, right? Yeah. When generally they are pretty neutral, right? But what they'll do to project that neutrality is they will skew things to the right to make it look like, right? And so they'll give, example, they'll give equal time to climate deniers and climate scientists, or that kind of stuff, right? To give this image of neutrality. Or I saw this right-wing nut that I know from back in Oklahoma post an NBC article about the bill that did not pass in the Senate, right? And in the actual article itself, it said that the Democrats are opposing this because they say it's got big corporate giveaways with no strings attached and that kind of stuff, and they're opposed to that, right?
Yeah.
But the headline from NBC, just regular NBC News, was Democrats hold up coronavirus relief bill. McConnell cites obstruction.
Yeah.
Right? Like making it sound like it was the Democrats' fault. Now, if you read the article, it's clearly that's not what's going on, right? But the headline is just that. And so my right-wing nut idiot friend from Oklahoma shares this, thinking that it confirms her view.
Right.
Right. But it's that they do that because they're trying to avoid that sense of being, too left-wing or whatever. They try to get the sense of neutrality, and they're just making themselves more right-wing biased.
During this quarantine, I've been playing a lot of games with my kid and my girlfriend, and we were playing Monopoly the other day. And one of the goals of any, I guess, strategy or whatever game is that you want to make the other players have a list of bad decisions that they have to make.
Right.
And so you're supposed to kind of like box them in and just, it's like, so what's the least bad decision are you going to make? So the least bad decision is for you to kind of veer to the right, kind of pivot to the right a little bit, even though you're supposed to be a centrist organization.
Right.
And that's the genius of the Republicans. And that's the genius of playing offense, to tell you the truth. And this is the problem with Democrats, right? In general, is that they play defense too much, and they don't have either the culture or the instinct to really go in and go hard.
Yep.
And that's why we lose.
Yep. Let me give you an anecdote about this. The Global Center for Religious Research, GCRR, put together an open letter to evangelicals who don't support Trump, calling them to basically abandon the leaders and institutions that do support Trump. And it was in response to that Christianity Today article that came out, right? So Christianity Today put out this article that basically said, we've got to wake up, Trump is a disaster, and we're gonna pay for it, right? Within 2 days, right-wing evangelicals wrote an open letter and got 200 people to sign, 200 ministers to sign this open letter that said basically Christianity Today is a liberal shill, get rid of them, we don't need them, Trump's awesome. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Took them 2 days to get 200 people. We tried to do an open letter as a response to that open letter. I say we. I was one person involved in this, but I was part of it to get people to sign an open letter that basically said, just to evangelicals who don't support Trump, not even to the ones that do. Just a letter to, you don't support Trump. You need to wake up. You need to realize that a lot of people around you do. You need to abandon. You need to call them out. You need to abandon these leaders and institutions that are still supporting him. It took a month and a half to get like 70 signatures. Yeah.
Really?
Well, that's because we don't have institutions like the Republicans do. We don't have institutions that currently agitate people. Unions used to do that, but unions do not exist effectively today.
Yes.
And there needs to be some other kind of non-government institution that acts as an agitating force for Democrats and for the left.
Right, and there just isn't one. Like
there isn't one.
Everybody who was going to sign it wanted to make their own edition, wanted to make their own change, just to make sure that it was right. Like it was infuriating. It's like it's I know it's cliche, but like it was like herding cats.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You just can't, and it's partly it's because there's independent thinking going on, right, which is a good thing, right? But at a certain point, that becomes a hindrance when you're trying to organize movements against something like the Republican Party.
I would like to suggest this to my Democratic friends, that all of this independent thinking, and this is going to be like a cardinal sin, but I'm a comedian, so I like to make cardinal sins, is that sometimes overthinking things is evolutionarily a bad strategy. You're going to get paralysis analysis, and you're going to be that antelope on the savannah, and you're going to get eaten by a lion. You're going to be eaten by a tigress, and overthinking that stuff, it's going to get you and yours in deep trouble. Yeah.
Yep.
Guys, on that note, I got to roll because I got to go daddy stuff, right? Okay. Because, Professor, it's been great talking with you.
Nice to meet you too, Andy. Anytime.
Well, thank you guys for joining me. I'll just go ahead and wrap it up now. I appreciate you, Andy, for co-hosting with me, and Kyle, thank you for coming back. We got to have you again for Sci-Fi Saturday. To do the Orville thing, because I'm ready. I'm ready to do the Orville thing with you. I've done it.
Right, so you're all caught up? You've seen them all?
I've seen them all.
Cool.
So,
all right.
I'll get
we
with
can
you
talk
and we'll
about my
schedule it.
articles. I'll
Okay.
send you those articles and stuff if you want to check them out or whatever. We can talk Orville all speaking day long. I got my uniform right over there. It's in the closet.
You got your
my
like.
office slash attic. It's right over there. So
You got your
yeah,
upvote
that'd be
button.
awesome.
You got your upvote button. You're gonna need that.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh no, I don't. I left it at work. My
Uh-oh.
upvote button is left at work, and I can't get into work now. So
Gotcha. Well, all right, guys. Thank you very much for joining me. I'll get with you, Colin. We'll plan something out. Thank you, Andy.
All right.
We'll see you next week. You guys have a
Sure.
great day.
See you guys later. Take care.
thanks.